Okay, so OCD and rumination. Rumination can be a trait of ADHD, right? That could be like, if you think of rumination, it's like overthinking, right? And there's a lot of reasons where we might overthink, specifically with ADHD. And some of those things are like we have a strong sense of social justice, right? Things like are not okay bother us a little bit more. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria. We might overthink like if we said something right or wrong, if we hurt someone's feelings, if they're mad at us. We don't always trust ourselves sometimes. As you've heard me say, studies show we had 20,000 negative messages about our behavior by the age of 8 as kids. And so sometimes we can go back and forth and not trust ourselves or, get scared of critique. We might overthink, and that could have been a coping skill that helped us mask our traits, right? If we got all those negative messages, we're overthinking and trying to do stuff to not get in trouble. We might forget things, right? We have sometimes impaired working memory, and so we might forget things. So we're constantly trying to remind ourselves of something over and over again. We might have more likely to have trauma, right? Because we take in more sensory stuff, so we have a higher prevalence of developing PTSD with ADHD. PTSD does not cause ADHD, but if you have ADHD, you're more likely to have PTSD because of our more sensitive nervous systems. And so we could think we might have a dopamine or cortisol surge when we think of things that are stressful. Cortisol, stress hormone, creates dopamine. So sometimes our brains that are lower on dopamine can almost get addicted to thoughts that hurt sometimes, or negative thoughts, because they're compelling, right? They're stimulating and we're understimulated. And so we might be a people pleaser, and we have 10 times the amount of thoughts as someone who doesn't have ADHD. So just the average person, if they overthink, well, we're probably going to overthink 10 times more because we just have 10 times the amount of thoughts, right? So rumination is a common thing for us. And there's a lot of, and next month we did the mental health month, and I know this was a little bit heavier month. We're going to do something a little bit lighter next month to kind of give it some variation. But what you'll find is, yes, we have some stuff that's harder, makes us overthink, and there's a lot of gifts to the other side of the coin as well, which we'll talk a little bit more about next month. So ruminating, if you think of it, it's just really like overthinking in a lot of ways. Whereas OCD, you're going to have more intrusive thoughts. And I'm going to show some charts here in a second, more compulsions. And so your overthinking is going to be partnered with compulsions. So an example of that, I've had OCD. I didn't get diagnosed with OCD until my 30s, which gosh, and I got on an antidepressant that I found out later helped OCD, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel amazing. Well, it was Zoloft, and again, that's not the. I'm just telling you, to humanize myself, but that's not the be all end all medicine. It depends on your brain chemistry. But Zoloft I got for depression, and I wasn't diagnosed with OCD, and it also treats OCD, and it was like this huge difference for more than just depression. And so I found out later I also had OCD, so it made a lot of sense. So OCD is you're going to have more compulsions with that, and the thing with OCD is that there's a lot of myths out there that it's like organized or really clean, and you can have OCD and be very messy. You can have OCD and not want to organize certain things a certain way. OCD is more about like repetitive thoughts that can cause harm, and it's obsessive thinking and rituals, and it's about reducing distress. And so there's also a type of OCD called pure OOCD. So a lot of things with OCD, you see like hand washing or counting or things like that, the compulsions. You can also have, a lot of people don't know about this, it's called pure OOCD. And this is the type of OCD I have because I don't check the stove, I don't touch the doorknob a certain amount of times, and the compulsions are mental. And so you replay things over and over and over again, and you rethink it. And so you're compulsively thinking about different outcomes or just repetitive things or intrusive thoughts, which are, I think it's called idiosyncrasy. I forgot the word for it, but essentially your intrusive thoughts are things you don't want to happen. They're the opposite of who you are or what you want to happen. And I got this chart showing the difference with ADHD, autism, and OCD because autism sometimes can have some overlap with OCD. And if you have ADHD, you also have autism, like I have as well, you could have a lot more rumination. And so you see, you've got with ADHD, right? Impulsivity, hyperactivity, craves novelty. And then what it shares with OCD is sometimes difficulties focusing, like attention difficulties. Because if you have OCD and you're constantly doing rumination or compulsions in your head or physically, you're not going to be able to focus on things a certain way. And then if we look at with OCD and autism, difficulty with uncertainty, that can be really difficult. So with OCD, it's not just you have these like thoughts, are you really organized, are you really clean? There's other stuff like difficulty with uncertainty or a a lot of rumination or a lot of fear that can happen as well. Like you're basically, or a lot high anxiety and the compulsions soothe the anxiety. And then we can see in the middle, the thing that they all share is executive dysfunction, which is organizing, prioritizing, planning, feeling motivated, getting things done, emotion regulation, right? All of that stuff we can share with that. Sensory sensitivities, and then repetitive behaviors. Now, and it's different depending on the root, right? Where is the repetitive behavior coming from? Because with ADHD and autism, we can stim, right? We can rock back and forth. We might have fidget toys. We might listen to the same song over and over and over again as a form of stimming. Whereas with OCD, the repetitive behavior is something you don't want. Like people that don't understand OCD are like, oh man, that just have no idea. They're well meaning. They're like, oh man, I wish I was organized. I wish I was clean. OCD is not fun. Like there's not many benefits. There's not really benefits. Let's just say like it can be very, it's impairing. Now I'm in remission. I'm on medication. I've done a ton of exposure therapy and all kinds of stuff. So I would still probably fit the criteria for OCD, but I mean, it's not impairing my life in the same way. I also am kind of used to it, but not like it was. And my, just so you know, so with intrusive thoughts, you can have intrusive thoughts on things that are unwanted, like images that you don't want, violence, things like that. My biggest one was a medical theme where I was constantly paranoid about having infections, and like being sick and chronic illnesses and researching. And it's like I couldn't stop. It's wild because with ADHD, the root of ADHD, part of that is dopamine dysregulation, whereas OCD, it's serotonin. So there's a little bit of overlap, but they're rooted differently in the brain. And so when I got an SSRI and I got an antidepressants and happened to be an OCD med, it balanced out my serotonin, and it was like, oh my gosh, you know. But some people, I've worked in mental health before with extreme OCD, extreme and resistant to medication and things like that. So it just depends on the kind of flavor you get. But there is a lot of things you can do with it. So, and then just this is a bigger one. I'm going to include this. I won't go through all of this, but I'm going to include this in the newsletter. This is a really great one of OCD versus ADHD, and these obsessive intrusive thoughts that cause distress. Another example, this is when I was a kid. I'm just, you know me, I like to be vulnerable here. So when I was a kid, and the intrusive thoughts for OCD are, again, are not in alignment with anything you would do or who you are. That's why they're so distressing. And so I've never gotten a fight, I've never punched anyone, I've never been violent in my life. But until my, I don't know, the last couple of years, I would not cut things with a knife because I was so scared I was going to slip or hurt someone. And it's not rational, right? But I literally didn't want to cut things. I always got so much anxiety because I had these intrusive thoughts, these images of me slipping with the knife. And it's like, it just beats you over the head with it and you can't stop them because it's like a chemical thing. And so they cause distress. OCD is not fun. It's not something you want. It's not something good. It doesn't make things clean. People who have the OCD where they clean, they can wash their hands until they blister, right? You can clean it and it's not clean enough, right? It's not just, oh, this feels good. It's like never clean enough. So it's kind of this pattern that just never you can complete, and it's always distressing and there's never enough. So I just want to bust the myth of OCD real quick that it's just this clean thing, or it's checking a doorknob or counting, because it can be purely mental. So the compulsive behaviors are to reduce anxiety or distress. And there's a lot of times perfectionism, extreme need for order. You might avoid certain situations like for fear or obsessions. One of the things I did, rock climbing, oh my gosh, that was like therapy for me because I constantly thought of falling every single second, like intrusive images. And just letting those be there and accepting them kind of like they're sitting next to you but you don't take them on. And that's more into OCD therapy, but allowing them to be there because the compulsions try to get them to go away or soothe them or like block them out. And really what the biggest thing for me was allowing them to be there and just being like, oh, that's OCD, like it can sit there, it's okay, versus like, oh my gosh, that might happen, oh my gosh. There was a lot more to my OCD therapy, but you'll see there's I'll include this in there, but there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of similarities. So if you find stuff in here that resonates, it doesn't mean you have OCD. It could be like you have ADHD and you ruminate a lot, right? That could be a thing as well, or you're stimming, right? So I don't want to scare anybody to think they have OCD, and I want to have people be aware of it. So we also have intrusive thoughts. So I'm going to do this chart as well. So intrusive thoughts versus rumination, and you can have both with OCD or not, right? Or I mean, sorry, you can have both. You have both with OCD most likely, and then ADHD. You could have both of these too, but they don't show up in the same way. So intrusive thoughts, these are unwanted, involuntary thoughts that are distressing or inappropriate. They can have all kinds of themes. They could have like sexual themes, violent themes, your sexuality, like driving your car into a tree, like things, and they're things that you don't want. And that's why, like, before I knew it was OCD, I literally thought I was insane. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I can't tell you, feel crazy because you have these thoughts. And it's like, oh my gosh, why are these coming up so much? Does this mean I want this? And then you freak out even more until you learn, like, no, it's like an imbalance in serotonin. And it's not that you don't want it at all. And so ruminations are repetitive, they're prolonged thoughts on a single topic, right? So intrusive thoughts are very distressing, very distressing. So when I had my medical theme with my OCD, I would go check, like, is this a sign of an infection? How do I protect myself from a chronic illness? And they're just, I'm gonna get MS, I'm gonna get chronic fatigue syndrome, and it's just wild to talk about now. I don't do that at all. I don't do it at all. But and it's just wild. But I had like 2 years of it. It was just it was really really rough, and I didn't know what it was, and I literally thought I was protecting myself from stuff. I mean, but I could still hold a job. This was years ago, but it's scary. It's really scary. So if you have these crazy thoughts that are not in line with you, that you don't want, that don't seem right, it could just be an intrusive thought. And everyone can have intrusive thoughts, right? Even if you don't have ADHD or OCD, it's just the repetitive nature, the extremeness of it, and how distressing it is, and how it like hurts your life, and you can't move forward, right? So and then intrusive thoughts, they're spontaneous, they can come out of nowhere. You could be you could be out like babysitting or holding a baby, and be like, oh my god, I'm gonna drop the baby, or it could be out of nowhere, or I'm gonna hurt my dog, or I'm gonna crash my car, so like literally out of nowhere. And that's why they can be so scary. Whereas a rumination might be a single topic over and over again, like, did I say the wrong thing? Did they not like me? And it's kind of like more repetitive. This might be a little bit more like stimming, and whereas this is an intrusive thought. And again, you can have these without OCD. It's just the extreme nature of it. So again, these themes can be taboo or inappropriate themes. Whereas rumination is going to be on past events, failures, common anxieties, things like that. And so intrusive thoughts are typically central to OCD, but you can still have them without OCD. Whereas rumination can be anxiety, depression, ADHD, autism, all kinds of things. And then intrusive thoughts can trigger OCD rumination. So you might have these intrusive thoughts, and then you're constantly thinking about it, how to protect yourself. And then ruminations can be a mental compulsion, kind of in response to the obsession. So again, you can have both without OCD. You can have both just with ADHD, but it depends on the extreme nature, how distressing it is, and how impairing it is for you. Now, the other thing with OCD and ADHD is really interesting. When you have a co-occurring diagnosis, and some of you guys know I worked in mental health before I got into real estate and coaching. When you have ADHD, you have lower impulse control, right? So if you have OCD and you do have compulsions, whether it's mental or whether it's like a external compulsion, you're more likely to give in to that compulsion because we have weaker impulse control, right? So your OCD, with any kind of comorbidity or co-occurring diagnosis, the ADHD can put a different flavor on the OCD, the other way as well. Right. Same thing if you have ADHD and autism. It's not just, I have ADHD and autism. I have ADHD, and that shows up very differently than just ADHD or just autism. So if you have OCD and ADHD, you might ruminate a lot more. You might do compulsions a little bit more. You might, uh, And it's also can be stimulating. So you might get addicted to negative thoughts a little bit more because they can create dopamine. So it's kind of interesting. But again, it shows up differently for all of us. Um, and so the key, I think the key symptom is what I've been reading because I always like to go on research, even though I've got the mental health background. I'm not taking update courses. I don't have an active license. So, if there's anything that doesn't resonate or your doctor said anything differently, please listen to that. But one of the key differences between OCD and ADHD is the compulsions. That's a key thing. And so even if it's mental, if you're doing the compulsions, if you're checking, that's a big one. If you're Googling or if you're checking constantly, or even checking sensations in your body nonstop. That was something I do is like, do I feel sick? Do I feel like I have a fever? Does this feel inflamed? Let me take pictures of this like cut that I got. And then a couple days later, let me take another cut to see if it's healing. Like those are compulsions. And that's going to be more of OCD versus ADHD. And thank God I don't do that stuff anymore. I mean, you're trapped. It's not fun. It's not cute. Like it's rough. It's rough. And so it's just interesting that ADHD and OCD also are caused by the same brain area. So the prefrontal cortex, right? Short-term memory planning, and uh, it's really though the result is with ADHD dopamine dysregulation, whereas OCD is serotonin. So there can be more of an overlap, and it's pretty interesting. So a couple things that with rumination or with OCD that don't work. This is stuff that I tried at first, and I used. If you don't have a diagnosis for OCD, and you use some of the stuff we have in our achievement culture, our success culture, it was horrible for me. So I want to tell you the stuff that did not work for me. So one of the first thing is replacing a bad thought with a good thought. So this is a common thing that we've had sometimes in our achievement world. It's like if you have a negative thought, flick yourself on the wrist or replace it with a good thought. That's actually a compulsion, and it made my OCD worse because what you're doing instead of you're basically performing a compulsion. So you have this bad thought or intrusive thought comes and let me do a good thought. So it's actually a compulsion. And I'm going to tell you what does help after this. That one for me can actually just increase the OCD. Um, Checking, like asking people overnight, hey, can you look at this? Or hey, is this, that's also compulsion. You're checking, but you're involving other people, or you're talking about the same thing over and over and over again, versus it being OCD and not believing it as real, right? Making a gratitude list, again, it depends on how you do it. If you're doing a pattern interrupt, that can, and I'll talk about that in a second, that can help. But if it's the same theme of replace a bad thought with a good thought, it can start to turn into a compulsion. If you have OCD, you might know what I'm talking about. Like once we get a compulsion, it can be a thing. If you don't have OCD, it's hard to articulate. But if you give me some kind of compulsion instead of what I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to do the compulsion, and my OCD just looks different, right? So gratitude list can be great unless you're trying to slap a band-aid on something. That doesn't always help. And then just resisting and like running from it, numbing it out. I always had that image of like taking a beach ball. That's one of my favorite, and pushing it down underwater, right? And constantly doing things. That's what those compulsions are. When you're replacing a good thought with a bad thought, you're making a gratitude. Like what you're doing is you're slapping band-aids and you got this beach ball that you're holding underwater, right? That's full of air. And the second you stop doing the compulsion, right, it pops up and you get hit in the face with it. And so resisting and running from them doesn't always help. Getting mad at yourself, that doesn't help, right? Just telling yourself to get over it, suck it up, think about something else. That doesn't really help, right? Because if I say, hey, and this is another example I like, right? Don't think about the movie Lion King right now. Don't think about the music. Don't think about the characters. Do not do it. Don't think about Lion King, right? You're what movie are you thinking about? Like you're gonna think of it, right? But if like just get over it, don't do it, don't think about it. You're gonna think about it, and so that doesn't work. So one of the things that does help a lot is removing the resistance. So remove the resistance. Like accepting that the thoughts are there. Like when I had those thoughts about like not being able to like hold a sharp knife and cut stuff because somehow I was going to slip and fall and hurt myself or whatever. I mean, the images, the real images in your head, and so you don't want to touch it. So removing the resistance and saying, oh, like that's the OCD or that's the rumination or that's the thoughts, and you just allow them versus like thinking that that's what's going to happen, and just allowing it to be in the background was probably one of the biggest things that I've ever done in OCD therapy. And it's kind of um, like I call it like kids on the bus, and I use that analogy sometimes where I'm driving and I have impulsive thoughts or about the medical theme, and then about a knife, and like that I was going to hurt my dog or something like that. And so I allow them all to be on the bus, but they're not driving, and I just say, hey, you can sit there, you can't drive, but you can sit there, and you can sit there, and you can sit there, and that's fine, and you can sit there and you can talk and whatever, but I'm driving, instead of them driving. Oh my gosh, I can't cut onions up with a knife because I'm going to slip. So it's allowing them to be there because the resistance is what can really make things worse. And then like medication can be really helpful. I think medication is wonderful. It saves lives. I'm so glad I finally went on medication. I'm not on that type anymore. I'm on something that kind of half treats it while it treats ADHD as well. And I was able to gradually get off of it with different therapies and things like that. But some people are on it forever, and it's great. And I've thought about going back on it. Sometimes I do, like it would help me. So I'm kind of toying with that. But yeah, medication can be really helpful. Therapy, someone who understands OCD is very, very important, like that specializes in it. Exposure therapy can be helpful, and it can also be very traumatizing and distressing. So exposure therapy is like, so I'll give you an example. Let's say you have to touch a doorknob 5 times before you leave. That's just like a, kind of a stereotypical thing. So if now you practice not touching the doorknob, right? Well, sometimes because it's so rooted in our psyche, it can literally cause like full blown panic attacks. And if you're forced too much, it can flood your system. Where if it's gradual, or maybe you need medication support first, or maybe you do a step in between, because when you touch the door, let's say you have to touch the doorknob 5 times, or like your spouse is going to die, right? If you touch the doorknob 5 times and your spouse doesn't die that day, then it reinforces in your brain that that's because you touched the doorknob, right? Whereas if you don't touch the doorknob and then your spouse doesn't die, it teaches your brain, hey, like that activity is not connected to this. But unless you have OCD, it's very touchy. It's not just as simple when you have that serotonin imbalance. And so, yeah, and so there's just OCD therapist is going to be really, really helpful. I'm not going to, tell you how to uh, cure OCD because that's going to be depending on the theme, the treatment plan, the OCD therapist, but removing that resistance and understanding what it is and labeling it as that versus this thought that's coming in and you must be a horrible person because you have it was like the huge, or that you want that to happen, right? If you have an intrusive thought of driving into a tree, doesn't mean you want to drive into a tree, right? It's an intrusive thought. So a couple other things, and then we'll do questions. Pattern interrupt. So with rumination, so we'll go back to rumination. That's OCD. With rumination, if you're ruminating on something and it's not OCD, right? It's not driven by that. Then when it stops to be, when it stops being helpful. So if you're ruminating and you're finding yourself in a loop, you just have rumination, right? Maybe it's not OCD, or maybe it is, but you're in this constant loop that you can't get out of. Doing a pattern interrupt can be helpful, like going for a walk, a video game, movie, TV show, and even getting on your phone, walking your dog, playing a sport, like something, because we can also get in these patterns of rumination, super like really in our head, that are just rooted in like a pattern, right? And our brain's doing, and so if you can interrupt the pattern, and that's just rumination, not necessarily OCD, but it depends on the overlap. If you're doing OCD rumination, this might help. But yeah, like a pattern interrupt can be very helpful for some people. Different things work for different people. Another thing is you can't really think your way out of rumination. You're already in your head, right? You're not going to think your way out of your head. You're already deep in your head. And so the best thing you can do, and this is for OCD as well, like walk, get in your body, something to get out of your head, get in your heart, something like that. If it's rumination, sometimes that can be the root of like a lack of dopamine. And so getting in your body or walking or exercising or movement or listening to music or dancing or something like that, one's going to get you in your body. It's also going to produce dopamine. So your brain's not trying to manufacture it through this rumination. Self-soothing, self-care, tell someone that you're having these thoughts, those kinds of stuff. So a pattern interrupt is definitely okay. But again, play with it, right? If you have OCD, play with the pattern interrupt, see if it helps. But if you're doing the pattern interrupt as a compulsion to the OCD, now you've got an OCD loop, if that makes sense. And those who have OCD are going to understand what I say by that a little bit more, I think, is that we can really get in some compulsion. So, but those are the differences, and there's a lot of stuff you can do. But if you have either one of those, like I said, I mean, it can get so much better. It really can. And the first thing is just getting a name for it, right? You're not crazy if you have these things. It's just a chemical thing, and there's stuff you can do about it. Well, thank you for being on OCD and Rumination. We'll send the newsletter out, and then we'll see you next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And thank you for being here.